Welcome back to the Explanation Pro. Today I'll recap a martial arts film called Only the Strong. Spoilers incoming. The film centers around Luis, who just got back to Miami from Brazil, where he served as a Green Beret. While still in Brazil, Luis sees a couple of people perform capoeira and he joins in. A jeep then stops by as the crowd disperses. A military man in the passenger seat hands Luis a letter and tells him that he's going to be sent back home. Before he leaves, one of the locals gives him a berimbau. He arrives in Florida and goes to his old high school to visit his former teacher, Mr. Kerrigan. In the bathroom, Luis is confronted by a student asking if he's selling any drugs. He ignores the student and goes to Kerrigan's classroom, where he watches from outside as the students disrespect their teacher. Once class ends, Luis enters the room and approaches Kerrigan, who seems surprised to see him at first. Luis notices and says that he can just go back later if it was a bad time. Kerrigan assures him that it's fine and that he was just exhausted because of class. Luis then explains that since he's now back, he's finding something new to do. The teacher then tells him to follow downstairs to the feeding grounds. They go down the stairs where Kerrigan explains that the school placed bars around the staircase to stop students from falling. They then sit down outside to eat and Kerrigan admits that he wants to quit already, seeing as how the school is filled with too many delinquents. Luis tries to change his mind, but when the teacher is firm with his decision, he stands up to leave. Suddenly, a crowd surrounds one of the dealers harassing his brother and telling him to sell the drugs they provide. A frustrated Luis tells them to let the young man go. The dealers charge at him and he easily beats all of them one by one. Kerrigan applauds Luis for catching the attention of the students and proposes to the other faculty and staff to let Luis teach capoeira to the students. Kerrigan's plan is for Luis to teach the worst students capoeira to give them a release of their tendencies. Most of them disagree with teaching martial arts to students who are already violent enough as they are. A female teacher and former schoolmate of Luis named Diana defends Luis and Kerrigan's plan. Diana argues that their current system isn't working anyway, so they might as well give their plan a chance as some sort of last resort. Later on, Luis catches up to Diana as she leaves the campus. He starts to thank her for supporting her earlier. He also offers to help her carry her things and tries to ask her out, but she shuts him down. She clarifies that her support for his plan is purely for the students and not for him. Diana then calls out to one of the teachers who opposed his idea named Hector. She asks him to help her with her things and gets in his car before he drives away. Kerrigan gets an old firehouse as a place for Luis to teach the students. The two of them clean it up before the students are dropped off. School staff also arrive to hand them the students' records before leaving. The students are told to line up inside the firehouse. Once inside, they start being rowdy and one of them starts to play music until Kerrigan tells him to turn it off. Two students begin to fight and Luis interrupts them, having the music be turned on once again. He demonstrates a basic move of capoeira called the ginga, which the students laugh at before he performs a kick. Luis then borrows the music player and plays some capoeira music that he recorded back when he was in Brazil. The students start to mock this and one of them named Orlando moves to take the player and turn it off. Luis quickly grabs it and Orlando takes out a knife. They start to go around the room in circles until Luis manages to disarm him. Luis gives Orlando his knife back, much to Kerrigan's disbelief. He explains that they would need to trust the students to let them open up. The student with the cassette player, Donovan, borrows Luis's tape. The next morning, Luis wakes up and finds Donovan playing some music outside. Donovan gives him the tape back and tells him that he edited the music to make it more modern, which is what he was playing then. Luis smiles and says that the others will like it. Luis takes the students outside and plays Donovan's mix. He tries to teach them the ginga once again, while Orlando keeps on heckling the class. The drug dealer's brother from earlier, Shay, interrupts Luis and says that he thought they were going to learn how to fight. Other students mock Shay and are about to start another fight when Luis dismisses the class for everyone, except Shay. The young man is frustrated until Luis tells him that he'll be personally teaching him to go up against one of the other students. Kerrigan arrives at the firehouse that night and finds Luis and Shay training, with Shay progressing decently. The next morning, Shay manages to win against his classmate, which encourages the other students to join and slowly learn capoeira. Luis takes out the berimbau while some students play the instruments to form a beat. He then approaches Orlando and tries to convince him to learn, saying that he knows he has it in him to do it. Orlando gets frustrated and walks out. Lewis finds Orlando later that night playing basketball with other men. He asks him why he walked out and if he's doing small errands for his cousin, who's a well-known drug lord in the area. Orlando's cousin, Silverio, arrives just as Lewis starts to defeat the other men using capoeira. Silverio offers Lewis anything in exchange for him to teach his men capoeira as he did with the students. Lewis refuses and starts to leave, but the other men block him. Silverio tells him that he grew up in Brazil and is also proficient in capoeira. Lewis fights Silverio but is easily defeated. Silverio then says that he'll let Lewis teach Orlando the basics before he'll teach his cousin himself. He then threatens Lewis not to corrupt Orlando while doing so. Lewis goes back to the firehouse where Diana patches him up. She tells her that she knew about Orlando's family and did try to warn him. Lewis tells him that if he doesn't do something to change the kids, then he'll feel guilty about it. She then teases him and mentions their past relationship before asking if his hand was alright. He does a flip and says it seems fine. Lewis then dares Diana to do a handstand. They end up in a compromising position where he starts to kiss her and she kisses him back. The classes continue and this time, Orlando participates. Hector confronts Diana about Lewis and asks her what really is going on in the firehouse. She then tells him to see for himself. Hector arrives as Orlando suffers a nosebleed, and scoffs that what the students learned was merely a new way to hurt each other. One of the staff also visiting then points out that the students were now more disciplined and they were planning to propose a citywide capoeira class. A film crew arrives at the firehouse to film the students' progress and the staff member tells Lewis that if he needs anything for the program then he just needs to ask. He then asks on the spot to have a field trip for the students. He takes them to what looks like a forest and they arrive at night. Lewis then tells them to get out of the bus and help him set up a tent. The students and Diana decide to stay on the bus, leaving Lewis alone to camp out. The next morning, they get out of the bus and find that they were near the beach. They see Lewis near the shore practicing and soon join him. Diana then takes a picture of all of them after their training. Once night falls, the students pitch their tents by the beach. Lewis then approaches Orlando, who tells him that he was supposed to be working that weekend. Lewis tells him that he doesn't need to do errands for his cousin anymore and that he can choose to have a better life. Orlando seems to have a change of heart. Their field trip soon ends and they ride the bus back to school. Silverio arrives and confronts Orlando about missing the job he was assigned to do. Orlando starts to stand up to him and is then threatened to go to Silverio's car. Lewis gets out of the bus and tells him to leave without his cousin. Silverio says that he's pulling Orlando out of school and gets irritated at Lewis's continuous opposition. He then turns to leave and one of his men starts to grab Orlando. Lewis defends Orlando and Silverio turns around. Shay's brother and Silverio gather with their men to watch a capoeira performance. The brother tells him that they should just shoot Lewis dead, but Silverio says that that wouldn't be enough and that they must make a cautionary tale out of Lewis, especially since the students are looking up to him. Lewis and Silverio are about to have a rematch when a cop arrives and questions why Silverio was there despite having a restraining order in a school zone. He explains that he was just there to pick up his cousin. Orlando concedes and tells Lewis that he has to come with Silverio because they're family. He then tells Lewis that if he wants a fight, then he'll give it to him before he leaves. The next morning, Silverio and his men invade the campus. They destroy the cars in the parking lot, attack the faculty, including Kerrigan, and burn down his classroom with him inside and unconscious. Shay and Donovan see the smoke coming out of the classroom and rushes to save Kerrigan. Donovan goes back into the room to get Lewis's berimbau but dies after suffocating from the smoke. The capoeira program is then shut down as the city has found out that they had no license to do it in the first place and because of Donovan's death. Lewis is escorted out to the back where he passes by a gym class. Shay approaches him and tells him that Orlando didn't show up for class and he probably never will again. He also warns Lewis that Silverio is coming for him. Orlando confronts Lewis in the firehouse that night and tells him that he should leave Florida so that he'll be safe. Lewis refuses, saying that he won't leave until he finishes his feud with Silverio. Orlando then finds a map where the car shop Silverio owns is marked. He then asks how Lewis knew where it was. Lewis simply tells him that it's quite well known. Orlando still tries to convince him to leave, even saying that he doesn't want to end up like Donovan. Lewis says that things won't change unless someone does something about it. Later, he goes to Silverio's car shop and fights against his men there. He then sets a car on a fire and throws a small canister of gasoline to cause an explosion, saying that it's his message to their boss. Silverio arrives and finds the wreckage that Lewis left behind. He then calls all of his men and issues a hunt for Lewis, telling them that he wants him alive. Orlando arrives and he scolds him for leaving before saying that it was Lewis's fault. His men manage to find Lewis and outnumber him. They then start to drag him to Silverio, but they are blocked by the students, including Orlando. The two groups begin to fight against one another, but Silverio stops them and issues one final warning for them to back off. Silverio turns to Orlando and tells him that he'll deal with him later, but Orlando challenges him to a fight. He starts to kick him, but Silverio easily beats him. Lewis then calls out to Silverio and tells him that it's the two of them who should fight. He then proposes that if he wins, then he'll get the students back. They start to fight, this time blending swords with capoeira. He eventually disarms Silverio and places his own sword aside as they continue their fight. Silverio gains the upper hand until the students start to chant and Lewis fights back. The students notice that some of Silverio's men are preparing to shoot, so they attack them just as Lewis deals the final blow to Silverio. The students run towards Lewis and cheer when the police arrive. One of the cops recognizes Lewis and his capoeira program. The cop then notices the unconscious Silverio and Orlando explains that it was Silverio who started the fire in the school and killed Donovan. The cop asks Orlando if he's willing to testify in court against his cousin and he agrees, despite the cop's warnings about how Silverio treats witnesses testifying against him. Orlando says that he's not afraid anymore and that his cousin no longer owns the neighborhood. The movie ends with the students graduating and them performing capoeira during the ceremony as the audience cheers them on. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. See you in the next video.